Hello, everyone. My name is Basma, and on behalf of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, thank you for joining our conversation today about extremist groups and how they are responding to the global health pandemic we are all facing. Our speaker today is Bruce Hoffman, who is a senior fellow for counter-terrorism and homeland security at the Council on Foreign Relations. He is also a professor at Georgetown University, where he was the director of the Center for Security Studies. He previously held the corporate chair in counterterrorism at the Rand Corporation and has also worked with the US government as an advisor, notably serving as a scholar in residence for counterterrorism at the CIA. Bruce, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
To start off our conversation, of course, terrorist and extremist groups have been a significant threat to the world over the last few decades. I wanted to ask you how or what the impact of COVID-19 is on these groups in terms of their numbers. Are they experiencing many casualties?
No, it seems most of them are laying low. Where we're seeing terrorist activity is in the more or less typical loci of conflict in North Africa, particularly the Sahel, in East Africa and Somalia, certainly in Syria and in Yemen, Afghanistan, of course, but we haven't seen the spread of it elsewhere. Now, on the one hand, some weeks ago, ISIS, or the surviving Islamic State, actually warned its members not to travel to Europe and not to risk contagion. Since then, though, its targeting guidance and operational guidance has changed a bit. It's shifted now to blaming the United States, the West, China, and India, its foremost enemies, for having caused this, and said that they're now appropriately suffering and that this is some kind of divinely ordained travail being visited upon them. And just in the past few days, they have now, for the first time, called for lone actor attacks. And interestingly, they selected two specific venues, London and Chicago.
Right. And you just touched on this. So I did have a question. How do extremist groups generally target and recruit people, and how might they be exploiting this pandemic to do so?
That's absolutely right. I mean, terrorists historically are the consummate opportunists in that they seek to take advantage of crises in the world, of issues in the headlines, and try to use those as a way to elbow themselves into the limelight, not only to attract attention to themselves by making threats, let's say, or by making commentaries such as we hear also from Al-Qaeda and the Taliban that this is proof positive that the United States is a declining superpower because it can't cope with this crisis. And they attempt to really attract attention to themselves and to their cause by piggybacking on things like the coronavirus pandemic. And they seek to especially appeal to people who obviously, are hunkering down at home, may not have many distractions or diversions, may already be susceptible to grand conspiracy theories, to a sense of paranoia perhaps, to a desire for action. And they're seeking to appeal to almost their worst instincts and to motivate, inspire, and actually animate them to go out and commit acts of violence.
Right. Speaking of action and committing these acts of violence, generally we've seen them attack a large gathering such as schools or malls. Now with everyone staying at home and fewer public gatherings, how might they be altering their attack strategies?
That's a very good question, because obviously mass transit, subways, commuter lines, commercial aircraft, there's no one on them. So kind of the stock and trade of terrorist targeting, or at least the targeting set that they have historically favored, they've been deprived of. And I think that's one reason why many of these groups are just laying low at the moment, because they're as taken aback and as off balance as we are. They're very quick to, as I said a moment ago, to try to capitalize or exploit it. But at the same time, in terms of operationalizing that animus or that hatred, it's more difficult. But there was, I think, a very disconcerting incident last week, or attempted plot that the FBI broke up in Kansas City, where an individual was plotting to blow up a hospital treating coronavirus patients. And this person was a white power advocate or a white supremacist, which I think underscores that the threats we face today from terrorism are not specific to any one region of the world or any particular people or any particular religious. But what we're seeing in the 21st century is that terrorism, unfortunately, because of social media and the internet to an extent, has become accessible to any group.
Right. And lastly, now we're seeing some countries release some prisoners due to this virus. Are we expecting some captured terrorists might be released and go back and strengthen support for their groups?
In this country, the sentences for material support for terrorism or for supporting terrorism tend to be much longer than in many of our European counterparts. So, firstly, people have long terms and they're not going to be released. What prisoner releases have occurred in this country that I've seen is mostly on the municipal level, and it's mostly people who are imprisoned, either awaiting trial, who could be relied upon to show up for trial because of large amounts of bond, or who have committed nonviolent crimes and therefore can relieve the pressure on the prison system. I haven't seen any indications, at least in Western Europe, that terrorist prisoners are being released. I think that pattern is pretty much being the same. And of course, the political fallout from the coronavirus, I suspect, is going to be greater than it's already been because of the general lack of preparedness in the West. But the point is, freeing a terrorist who then may rejoin his or her group or may commit an act of violence would be so enormously politically costly that I would say that they are in the category of prisoners that probably will not be released temporarily or receive early release.
Thank you very much. That concludes our conversation today. Thank you again, Bruce, for joining us, and thank you to our audience. Please continue to follow our social media and check our website for future discussions, and stay safe.